All right. Well, hi, guys. I am really happy to be here, and I've been looking forward to this. And as a matter of fact, I was driving down this morning, and I was thinking about sitting in your seats in 1989 and having a speaker come in, and I started thinking about what is kind of an equal distribution of how much older I am than you versus how much older that person would have been than me. And so that would have been like me sitting watching someone that graduated in 1961. So there's a fair amount of space, but I feel like I just graduated last year. So someday you'll be standing up here and you won't believe how short the time is. But what I want to do today is, first of all, I want to keep it fairly simple. I want to tell you a little bit about me and my background, just so you understand, you know, I'm a Purdue grad. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about what my job is at GM, just to kind of frame up what my professional background is. And then I want to share some thoughts around leadership with you, especially when it comes to a global enterprise, which certainly is different. But frankly, I hope to get through all that fairly quickly so we can just talk and do question and answer, and any things that you might have on your mind that someone like me might be able to answer, or advice that you might want, or something like that. So with that, I'll kick into, I grew up in Indiana, in southern Indiana. I grew up on a farm, did sawmill, kind of got a technical interest as a youngster, and all the things that you work on a farm. And so that led me through, I also was interested in math and science, just like you are, and it led me through the path into an engineering degree. And I'm married, and we have two kids, and my daughter is kind of the athlete artist. My son is the gearhead. Anything about a car, he can tell you. He knows more about the competitive environment than I do right now, especially like exotic cars. He loves that stuff. I like to golf. I love John Deere stuff, and I spend a lot of time outside. And so my professional history, when I was here at Purdue, I co-opted, which if you have the opportunity, I highly recommend that industry interface during your learning years. And I think it's important because when, depending on, almost every degree, I suppose, is very technical. And so trying to understand how am I going to apply this when I get out in the real world, sometimes it's difficult to see that. And so spending the time working for a company for a given time, being given real work, and by the way, General Motors, if you come to intern with us or co-op with us, you're going to get real assignments because there's a lot going on, a lot of movement in our industry. But I think it's so helpful for you to be able to translate, all right, this is what I'm learning, and this is how I will really be using it as an engineer or a technical person in a company somewhere. Then a lot of different assignments I won't go through. I would say probably my core expertise is vehicle development, vehicle evaluation. I've spent a lot of time driving cars at the limit on racetracks around the world, like the Nürburgring, and was just at Laguna Seca last week. And so it's interesting over the course of my career, which you may see the same thing. An 8-second 0 to 60 car when I was in your seat was a really fast car, basically kind of a sports car. Now our family sedans do 0 to 60 in 5.5 seconds, and I was driving cars last week. The lowest horsepower was 650 horsepower, and those are passenger cars. So it's interesting how it evolves, and what you'll probably see from now to 28 years from now is autonomous cars, electric cars, going away from internal combustion engines, fuel cells I think you'll see coming, but just that's all for different conversations. So the last thing I would just say what people say about me, evaluator, trust and integrity. Basically, I am, from the day that I started any type of a career, it's so important to me to do what I say I'm going to do, and to keep confidences. If you tell me something in confidence, I absolutely will not tell someone else, which is really important when you get into kind of the politics may be a strong word, but just the interactions you get in the workplace, because if people are seeing you as someone they can trust and someone that they value your judgment, that helps you form those relationships with all the people you have to work with, be your peers or people that you're leading or your leaders. I've always, from a career standpoint, I've always been more worried about how do I make my company and the product better versus self-promoting, which self-promoting to me is a big red X. If someone's putting themselves out in front of others, in general, that's a negative. And especially now more than ever, teams are so critical in everything we do. And I think that's in any discipline, any industry. No one is an individual contributor anymore. You are going to be part of a team. So you have to learn to work as teams. And you know, in the end, I just want to make great cars and trucks for the company. Very quickly, what I do at GM, I have responsibility for global product integrity. And if you look, it's more or less engineering at a vehicle level. So crashworthiness, when you see how we design cars for crashworthiness, airbags, vehicle performance, cybersecurity. You can see, I won't read the slide, but basically anything that we do at a vehicle level that integrates all the systems together. I'm more or less the key integrator of product at General Motors. And the other thing that is one of my key responsibilities is I have, when we do investigations for product recalls, I'm one of the voting members, 5 in the company, that go through those databases and decide, do we need to take action in the field or not? So it's an important outcome of some recent activities at GM. So global leadership, I show this slide as a simplistic idea of where we have global activities, engineering, and proving grounds, and what I would just kind of the broad topic of global leadership and global activity. How many of you have had a chance to work outside our country at all? To do any science? That's a lot, that's great. And that's important because what you'll find, the world has shrunk. I mean, with the internet and with the type of social media we have and the data transfer and the way everyone shares information, the world has gotten so that it's so easy to work with people that are in China, for example, and get to know them well and do that remotely to a large degree with some level of travel, but it doesn't matter where someone is placed in the world. We can form a bond, we can work on things together, we can get things done together, we can be in the same company, or we can support each other maybe as a supplier to original equipment manufacturer or something like that. But the point is, as you guys are getting ready to go out into the world, you're going to find out that you're going to be working with different time zones and different cultures, and the most fun thing that you'll see is the diversity of thought just based on someone's background really brings so much to the party when you're designing something or when you're executing something. They may have a completely different perspective than you do on the task at hand and what the priorities are. And so as you get more mature in your careers and as you're starting, that's something to think about, that you may not see eye to eye with someone at all initially. And what you'll find is they've just had a completely different experience than you have in terms of the product you're working on, or maybe the rules and regulations of whatever the country they're from. And so I would point out, go with an open mind whenever you're dealing with people from the different countries or cultures or backgrounds. I mean, people can have different backgrounds even in the same state. So you may come at things differently, but have an open mind on why is it that they may be zeroing in on something that seems odd to you, and it may be just a completely different perspective. But this gives you an idea. This is just a quick outline of where we have proving grounds. We also have a proving ground that we use up in the Arctic Circle to do like stability control, traction control type work, and we drive our cars and trucks out on a lake that's 42 inches thick of ice, and that's where they do the semi testing as well. They take semi trucks out there, tractor trailers. But this gives you a variety of the kind of locations that we go to, but also just the kind of diversity of, on the different continents, different countries, different backgrounds. What is difficult, I will tell you, is if you're in North America, for example, there's a 6-hour time difference in Europe. So that's not so bad. If you're in Europe, that's awesome because you're right in the middle of the day. Your middle of the day is morning in the US and evening in China. So it's fairly easy for you to work with them. But for us, it's 13 hours different to China. So I'm going to China tomorrow, and you have to completely turn your body clock upside down, or you have to do calls. We'll do calls at 8 o'clock at night to call them at 9 o'clock in the morning, or there are just ways that you have to work around it. So there's some level of difficulty with doing the global work, but it's a fact of life. I mean, when you talk about global products, global companies, there's no such thing as being siloed in the United States where you don't have to work with other cultures for the majority of companies that you're going to see. So now, and I'm ripping along pretty fast on this stuff, so I'm hoping you guys are going to have a lot of questions because I think that the give and take's a lot more beneficial for all of us than for me stand up here and talk. But I wanted to go through just a couple of things to think as you go through because when you're thinking about leadership and independent of what position you may have in a company or a team or whatever, you're all going to be leaders in one way or the other. I mean, if you're responsible for a subsystem of a product, you're the leader of that subsystem. And so you have to represent that, you have to work with the other teams, and you have to be able to lead in that way. You may lead people, you may have a team that you're responsible for, or you may be leading an important project overall. And so I would tell you, even if you think that you don't have any interest in leadership, I think these things can apply to just how you deal with people. So, first of all, as a leader, independent again of what you're working on, as you're working, people are watching you. And so they're making judgments on you, and they're watching what your methodology is and the things I mentioned before, like integrity and honesty and how you go about your business, and are you putting in the effort required to get your work done and to stay on even keel with the rest of your team. People will notice that. And the higher you get in an organization, the less anyone will tell you feedback. So you're kind of flying blind a little bit because you're not necessarily sure what people think of you, but you can be assured that people are watching you. So when you listen to them, they notice. What's important about that is people really notice if you don't listen to them. And so if you kind of half-heartedly are listening to people and they're trying to share something with you, or especially they're trying to ask for help and you're not focused on listening, people absolutely pick up on that very quickly. When you talk, they're listening. And so how you communicate and how you talk to your teammates and your leaders, those things that's pretty obvious, but you have to think about that when you are communicating. How are you going to get your ideas across? You may be the smartest person in the room, but if you can't communicate and tell a picture or kind of paint a picture of what you want to accomplish and why, it's difficult to get that type of support from other people. And that's the basis of getting things done. And then every time you act, like what do you do and how do you react, especially if things are going wrong, how do you react to those things? And if you have a problem and you need to solve a problem, how do you go about that? And so again, you have to, like it or not, your actions are going to be interpreted many different ways by many different people. And so you have to think about what is the outside looking in view of what you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish. If you innovate, especially in today's world, in a company like GM, or any other leading tech company, Google or Apple, someone like that, when you're innovating, you're kind of plowing the ground that hasn't been plowed before, and so that will get attention very quickly as well. And how you innovate and share that information and get that moving is going to be critical. And so long story short, as you go through your career, people will be watching you and they're going to learn from you, either good or bad. And for me personally, I've watched leaders that I thought were the best leaders that I've ever worked for, and I think about them a lot of times in terms of what's a good example on how I should do things. Conversely, I've seen people that I thought were terrible leaders, and they treated people terribly in public forums and berated them, and I learned that day too, or during those situations, how not to behave. And so I think that's important as you go along as well. And so one of the things that we talk about is there's a list of companies over time that, you know, they were the biggest companies in the world, and then they failed because they didn't change, they didn't adapt to the way things were going along. And so when you think about how you're going to survive, for us as a business, we think about what is it that would put us out of business. You know, if someone invented a car that could run on water, then that would probably put us out of business. And so you have to think a step ahead to innovate to who's going to come out of nowhere that might be able to really affect you. But I think just as importantly, you yourself, think about whatever job you're in. You know, when you get your first job out of Purdue, think about your job and then think about what would the ideal person doing this job be like? What would they be doing? How would they go about it? And I think about my job. What's my counterpart at BMW doing today? And what do they do? And how would they go about this? And I think that's healthy because it will keep you from being kind of resting on your laurels or being too comfortable in a position. It helps you be aggressive and think, you know, what does it take to be the best in your position, and what would that look like? So that really, I blew through that really quickly, but I really wanted to be able to just talk a little bit and do some question and answer, and I think anything is open. What I would tell you is I always, if I can answer your question, I'm going to answer it. If I can't answer because of some confidential thing, I'll tell you that in advance. And if I can't answer a question, I can get you an answer, so I can follow up with you. So I'm open to anything you want to ask, and I'll be more than happy to talk through it. Yeah.
So I'm just kind of curious how exactly like your path like brought you to where you are now, like in the company, because you're not really doing like the hands-on work, so to speak, anymore, right? You're just kind of like overseeing different aspects. So I guess like how did you kind of take that route up?
The way we, oh, I'm sorry. The question was, what was my path to get to an oversight type role in the company? I'm going to take my coat off, by the way. You can tell it's warm up here. When we go through talent evaluations in our company, we talk about it in terms of two axes. Basically, one axis being your behaviors, and one axis being results. And so how well do you do your job as a result? And then in the end, if you've done a great job, do people want to work with you again? Do people want to be on your team again? Being the behaviors. And so we all know people that are just great people. They bring in donuts, and you know they're really great to be around, but they actually accomplish nothing. So they're on one end of that spectrum. Then you also know people that they get the job done better than anybody. Any assignment you give them, they accomplish, but nobody wants to work with them because they're total jerks, and you know they do all the type of things you can imagine that you don't want people to do. And so when we're judging talent, we want people that can do both of those things, get great results and be great teammates. And I guess what I would suggest that I've done pretty well at that, where I've always been a pretty good teammate. I get results, and when people are looking, you know, when my leaders are looking for someone who can get the job done and they can trust, then I get pulled up. So that's kind of happened where I've gotten in bigger and bigger roles, because early in my career I was a lead development engineer, and so I had a team that we worked on a car, and it turned out very well. And so I was pulled into the next role, which was much different, and I was assigned a team of about 100 people that had a lot of a lot of personnel problems and HR problems, and they also had kind of structural problems. So that's what we call a fix-it assignment, where you're put in a job where it's a really tough job and it's kind of a make or break, sink or swim. Can you get it done or not? And so from there, it's just bigger roles and responsibilities where you're, in general, we try to take people and throw them into the deep water, and we don't do that without support. So we support the people as they do that, but we also don't do that without them having demonstrated we think they have the key characteristics that they could handle it. So the good news is, as you move in, higher roles in whatever company you're working for, you have more influence. So I can make things happen because I have, fairly large teams and influence in the company. The bad thing is you get kind of farther and farther away from that direct hands-on on the product, which is, when I retire, the best times I will ever have were doing, the kind of vehicle evaluation and development that I was doing probably 15 years ago. So it's all pluses and minuses. So. Other questions? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You said you had to face an issue where there was personnel problems and structure and that kind of thing. How did you approach that, and what were some things you did to fix it and things that didn't go very well?
It's when you're an engineer, you assume. I'm sorry. So the question was, when I faced the personnel issues and structural issues, how did I approach that? And when you're an engineer and you go through engineering school, you think there's a very definitive way to go through anything. And so also, until you get into management roles, you assume that any personnel problems are handled by HR, human resources. They kind of handle that. We work on the technical stuff. The fact is, the managers handle the HR stuff. And so if you have people that are have a conflict of interest where they're doing something they shouldn't be with an outside company, or they're having relationships inside the company that are not, that are forbidden, or they're stealing, or as a manager, you deal with that. And so you kind of learn as you go along how to approach those things, and you have to be always, always, always with integrity and honesty as you approach those things, because what I found, and one of the hardest things to do, is sometimes you will be a manager and one of your friends will make a mistake, and you can't treat that person any differently than you would the person that you don't know very well. And if you don't think people notice that, everybody notices that. If you treat one person differently than you treat the other. And so consistency of approach and consistency in how you treat people, consistency on how you react to whatever indiscretion someone may have done or mistake someone may have made, that's important. But I would tell you, walking through your careers, you're going to find yourself thinking, how do I do this? Because I didn't learn this in engineering school. And you just kind of have to apply what you've learned, or maybe do some research and find someone that you trust and ask them, who've been through those type of things before. Having a mentor that you can bounce ideas off of, that have maybe more time in the company or in the jobs, and ask them, what did you do when you saw something like this? And just navigating it and doing it in such a way that you really understand the situation, you don't jump to conclusions, you don't act too fast, and you come up with the right solution. Mm-hmm.
Could you maybe give a specific example of a social issue that you dealt with and what you did?
Okay, so the question is a specific example of a social issue? Yeah. So we had a situation where we had 2 employees, and they were driving a vehicle on a section of road in Detroit, and they were driving at 120 miles an hour. And so they actually rear-ended a vehicle in front of them, and so it was clear there was an accident. they pulled off to the road, off to the side of the road, and then decided to drive away. And so they left the scene of an accident. They were in an accident. They were driving 120 miles an hour. And by the way, they'd had too much to drink. So clearly, there were going to be repercussions for this. And one of the guys, the passenger in the car, was actually one of my friends I trusted, and he had done a great deal of really good work for us. But what he did was he lied when he was asked. When we have investigations, which it's any company you go to, I think you're going to find that things happen, bad things happen when you have a lot of employees. But long story short, when we had the investigator talk to him, he lied about what happened, and that's an absolute no-no, and I had to unfortunately let him go from the company. So those are the things that they're really hard, but you have to look and say, what would happen if I didn't do this? And everybody knew clearly, it's black and white, you can't do something like that and then lie about it and get away with it. So that's one of many examples. So, yeah.
How have you evaluated yourself as a leader and figured out what skills that you need to work on?
The question was, how do I evaluate myself as a leader and determine what skills I should work on? I try to, the relationships with the people that I work with as peers, but in this case, the people that I work with as my team or subordinates, that's kind of how I judge, am I getting it done or not? Because clearly results is part of it, just like I talked about before, behaviors and results. And I've always gotten results. My biggest fear always from a leader is, am I leading the team in a way that helps them get better? And when we're lucky, we have really talented people that are part of our teams, and all you have to do is steer them. Sometimes they need more help, so you get engaged more. And I think what I'm always worried about, especially as I've moved up higher in the company, but it starts from your very first leadership position, is how do you keep yourself from micromanaging the people that are on your team? Because if you're a micromanager, which everybody know what a micromanager is, I'm throwing around a bunch of corporate terms, but if you're a micromanager, you absolutely limit yourself to what you can accomplish in your career, because if you have 5 people working for you, you can try to do all 5 people of those jobs, and maybe you can get away with it. But I have 6,000 people working for me. I can't do all their jobs. And the fact is, there are people a lot better at their jobs than I would be at their jobs. And so you got to let them go. You just got to let them do their jobs. So my evaluation, really, the one I struggle with the most is always, how much do you get involved in the details versus how much do you kind of stay at the wave tops? And when do you have to get into the details to keep things going? And so I'm always really evaluating, do I have a grasp, a knowledge of what's going on without trying to do someone else's job? Because, with each leadership role, you're supposed to be making your team accomplish a goal and a task. And especially my role in the company, I should be worried about the strategy of our company, providing resources and money and budget, but also technical direction for the company. And if I'm worried about doing someone's job, I can't do that. Everyone has a role to play. So I guess that gives you a picture, a snapshot of kind of